He's Bruce the Blog
And
without his ascot.
You're stepping on my line. And he's Bazzo, and you're watching I'm Bruce the Blog Goes Bazzo.
Yes, good evening, everybody.
Hello again, everybody, and welcome to another episode of Bruce the Blog Goes Bazzo. We're very happy on this show to have with us our good friend, Dr. Steve Katz, who is the New York State Assemblyman for the 99th District, and we have a lot to talk about today with Dr. Katz. We're going to get to that in just 2 seconds, but first, I have a salute. We don't have
You do?
Yes, I do.
Wow.
Right. Thanks for reminding me. I would have forgotten if you didn't say something. Anyhow, the salute is to a county legislator who I think you all know very well, and we certainly do, Mike Kaplowitz. And this will actually then segue right into our discussion with Dr. Katz about politics and a lot of other things relating to politics. Now, what's happening with the Westchester County Board of Legislators, which is really outrageous, actually, is that they still have a Democratic majority, right? And they just appointed all their new committee chairs, not one person, right, from a party outside of the Democrats, so you can figure that out, has been appointed to a chair. People who were chairs who happen to be Republicans no longer are chairs, but this is something that really goes to my heart. Citizen volunteers weren't even reappointed. So basically they're saying we don't need your volunteerism, which is what people hate about politics. I mean, and that's really, the salute goes to Mike Kaplowitz, who's a Democrat, because he voted against it.
He was the only Democrat.
He was the only Democrat who said, basically what he's saying with his vote is, this is wrong, period. It's wrong.
But that is why Mike always wins his district hands down.
And why he's a little bit, for the best of reasons, he's a bit of an outcast with his own party members. You know why? Because he puts his constituents first.
Well, Reisman had a great line, and he says, I guess they're going to saw his desk in half again.
Yeah, right, which they virtually did the last time.
That was the office.
But again, the point I wanted to make with the salute to Mike Kaplowitz, who is the county legislator for District 4, right?
Right.
Is that this is what people hate about politics. So what, in this case, the Democrats, and listen, both parties can do this kind of thing. So whether it's the Democrats or Republicans is not the point. In this case, it is the Democrats in Westchester. They're conditioning people to dislike politics. It's cynical, it's divisive, and it's totally unjustified. So anyhow, having said that.
First of all, there's two things that I like to remind you every week. Number one,
yes,
who's producing our show? Who's sponsoring our show?
I thought you'd never ask, Bazzo. It's the Pennysaver, which this show is brought to you by. The producers are Carla Chase, who is the owner of Chase Media Group, which publishes the Pennysaver. And actually, our company does a lot of other things. There's a lot of printing. We print for a lot of towns, actually, in Westchester. And Frank Rich. And so we thank them, as we always do,
for putting up with this,
for allowing us to be here.
Second thing, we have our shameless promotion.
I don't know what I would do without you, by the way.
Our shameless promotion. That's why I'm surprised you're not wearing your ascot.
Well, because, no, I left my ascot at home today. I'm sorry. Yes, shameless promotion segment. There's a show that's going to be playing in White Plains. Not that you can see this on camera, unless we had a macro focus, but since we don't, I'll just read it to you. It's National Pastime. It's a very funny comedy. It's an original comedy about a radio station in 1933 that's going under. And so in order to save the station, they come up with this crazy scheme to broadcast the baseball games of a team that doesn't exist. And I play the owner of the radio station. If you go to forthillplayers.com, because the production company is Fort Hill Players, you can get all the information. I don't want to spend a lot of time on this.
Is it almost like the Pittsburgh Pirates that doesn't exist?
Maybe. Sometimes I think it's the Mets.
Now,
but anyhow, so we want to talk to Dr. Katz, obviously,
yes,
for the rest of the time.
We had a certain way we wanted to do this, but a story broke as we were taping. And even though we're airing 2 weeks after we taped,
Yeah, well, but I have something I want to ask you.
I want.
Right.
Well, I'm in.
But you know, we pride ourselves. If you watch the show, you know we pride ourselves on doing our research, right?
Yes,
Yeah.
but
and we have a very sizable staff of people who do research.
But
on
I
this,
want
right?
people to understand why there's a change in format at the moment, that you were going to deal with Dr. Katz directly on a breaking issue.
Well, you know, that's called lifting up the kimono. People don't need to know why we do things.
Yes,
it's
no,
TV. That's all they need to know.
I like when we have a breaking
Anyhow.
issue.
Okay. Well, breaking news. Yeah, it's part of
Yes.
our profession. Anyhow, if I can call you Steve,
Please.
because we do know each other.
Please do.
But the reason you're also called Dr. Katz is because you have a very successful veterinary practice right in the Bronx.
Yes, I do.
Your own hospital. So you also, and this is really pertinent to some of our discussion forthwith, you run a business, a sizable business.
I absolutely do.
And these days, I think people are electing more and more officials, candidates who understand business, because we need to get the
saw
economy
that
up and
in
going.
Yorktown, in
Yeah.
Yorktown. You're a resident of Yorktown. We
right.
just saw that
Right.
in the Yorktown.
People also should know that you're younger than me. You're 58 years old,
That's right.
which is younger than me.
You mean
I
I'm
always
the
like
baby
having
of the
people-
set?
Yeah, I know. I'm the elder statesman, I guess. And that you have, we know, a beautiful wife, Nicole, who's sitting here with us, and 4 daughters, 3 of whom are here.
Yes.
Right?
Yes.
Sydney, Skylar, and Shira. And
Yes.
the 4th is...
My daughter Ariella, and
Oh, right,
she
Ariella.
lives up in Cambridge.
Okay, right. So we're very happy to have your family as our audience,
Yes.
our very friendly audience,
It's our
I
first
might
time
say.
we've had an
Right,
audience.
Right. But we just wanted to share with the audience, Steve, that you long before you were elected to office, and even that story is quite colorful. You virtually came out of nowhere,
That's right.
and you challenged the establishment, and you won.
That's right.
And that also was reflecting the sentiment of the electorate, that they were basically fed up with the way things were. But anyhow, some of the things that we found in our research, our copious research, is that you've done things like in the, what was it, the Galapagos?
Yes.
You tagged nesting sea turtles, right?
Yes,
What was
yes.
that about?
I was in charge of mapping and tagging sea turtles on the Galapagos Islands the year before it became a national park of
Was
Ecuador.
that to rescue them? Or?
It was to make sure that people who came to the Galapagos, that visitors would not be allowed on those beaches during the nesting times.
Oh,
so I
okay.
went
So
from
it was to
island
protect
to
them. It
island.
was to
Yes,
protect the
I went
sea
from
turtles,
island
yeah.
to island to map the turtle nesting beaches.
Were
Right.
you a vet at the time, or?
No, I was a
This led-
biologist.
Oh, so this led you into your children.
One of the areas that did that. Yes.
Right.
Yep.
And then you also, in Israel, you were the assistant director of a wildlife preserve? Is that
I was
true?
the assistant director of the High Bar Biblical Wildlife Preserve, which is 18 miles north of Eilat, and
Right.
we had some of the rarest animals on the planet there, and it was essentially animals that lived in the Middle East and in the land of Israel during biblical times.
Oh, wow.
And it was
Like
fascinating.
Animal
It's
Planet.
10,000 acres, and
Like Jack Hanna, right? Isn't that the guy? What's the guy's name?
yes,
Jack
that's
Hanna,
right, just
I
like
think?
Jack
Yeah.
Hanna.
Right,
The eastern border was Jordan, and it was quite an exciting time.
right. And then, and this is really quite remarkable, better you than me, you actually, not to make light of it, you saved somebody from death, essentially, by capturing a python, a 23-foot python? Is
That's
that-
right.
Wow.
At the
And-
National
and,
Zoo.
and by the way, that python's first name wasn't Monty, was it? No.
That was, to that man, it was bad news.
right.
It had escaped from its cage at the National Zoo. I was with a friend of
This is
mine,
in Washington?
Washington,
Yeah,
D.C.
right, yeah.
This was right
Yes.
before I left for Israel to become the assistant director.
Right.
And the snake was coiled around one of the keepers.
Oh.
And it was constricting on his leg, and he
And
was.
that's how they kill people.
Oh yes, and he was
Choke you to
holding
death.
he was
Yeah.
holding the snake's head so that it wouldn't continue to bite his arm, and we untwisted him off of the animal caretaker, and we put him back into a safe hold. 23-foot long, 350 pounds.
Wow, that's so. I mean, did you have any training or
No, I
background?
saw a
You-
man.
so
I
it
saw
was
a
just
man
your-
on the ground who
So
was.
you just natural instinct and reflexes and
Yes.
adrenaline.
Yep.
Right.
It took three of us.
Well, still, that's quite courageous.
Yep.
I have
It
to
took
say.
three of
I
us
mean,
to
that's-
do that.
Yeah. Now I know that like me, you're a nice Jewish boy, and looking at you, it would be very hard for anybody to believe that you would ever be arrested for anything, right?
Funny,
Or-
you
That's
know
right.
what you
let
wish.
alone put in jail. Yeah, well, it must be the cosmetic surgery. But I mean,
It,
but that sort of came up, and we're wondering what that's about.
well, it makes for it makes for a great after dinner story to my friends, and my children keep asking me, and I'll keep a long story short.
Okay.
The first time I was in Philadelphia, and I had a veterinary practice, and on a hot summer night, an 80-year-old, one of my clients, an 80-year-old widow, and her 102-year-old mother called me because their 90-pound German Shepherd was dead in the living room floor. And could I possibly come and pick the dog up to take to my veterinary hospital and put it in the freezer that you keep for animals that pass away?
Right.
Well, I went over there and did that for them and put the dog in my trunk. Without getting more specific, it started to ooze on my daughter's Barbie dolls, and so I took it back to my apartment because I did not have the keys to my hospital. My assistant did,
Right.
and she was 2 hours away. So I decided I'll go to the apartment and I'll put the dog on top of the garbage so it will not be in my car. And when my assistant comes, we'll put it in the truck. She's got the keys, and we'll go over to the hospital. Well, when I turned around, there were 2 policemen there wondering what I was doing. And I told them what I was doing, at which point they arrested me. And at the arraignment, when they told the judge what had happened, the judge asked one question. Well, did you go into the apartment building to corroborate that Dr. Katz actually lived there? When they said no, the judge started to tell the police, don't you ever waste my time in this court again.
Right, yep.
Case dismissed. I'm sorry, Dr. Katz, that we put you through this.
And what was their charge, anyhow?
They charged with their charge ultimately was what was called short dumping, which is if you throw something in the garbage that doesn't belong there, which is normally something you write a ticket for, but this is what happened, and it's one of the stories of my life.
Well, you know, apparently if you put the dog on top of the car, you wouldn't have been arrested.
Right,
because
there you
Mitt
go.
Romney wasn't.
Did,
Right.
did you replace the dolls?
I had to for my poor daughter.
just checking,
And the
yeah,
second
I-
time I was in my new hospital in the Bronx, a couple came in with a vicious chihuahua this big that they couldn't control and were afraid of. The dog ended up lunging at me and was hanging on my arm, his teeth in my arm. In the process of me trying to shake him off, he fell off the exam table. The people freaked out, went to the police, had me arrested. When I got to the 46th precinct, they were trying to figure out what to book me for. And when I was arraigned and told the story, the judge rolled her eyes,
Right.
said, "Don't you ever waste time in my court like this again." Apologized to me for actually having to go through this. And there
This
are the
is
stories in a
almost-
nutshell.
Well, you know
This is
something?
almost bureaucracy running wild.
and
That
this is
people
a-
don't just ask the common sense question.
No, but my,
So those are my horrible jail time stories.
But you see, as a journalist, my thought, of course, hearing this is that the headline writers must have had a field day with "Vet is collared." Anyhow,
Now,
sorry, I couldn't resist.
I want to get into a New York State issue here.
Here we go.
Now, there isn't a newspaper story out there that hasn't, from the state to the county to the local governments, bemoaned the pension cost of bankrupting these various government entities.
That's right.
And other than Tom DiNapoli, who says, "Oh, there's nothing wrong with the
Who's
pension."
the New York State controller? we
Right.
should
Sorry,
point
I
out.
apologize.
That's what I'm here
Who's
for.
the New York State controller, and he says the pensions are fine, but we know that he is a creature of the public sector unions. They were the major contributors to his campaigns. But now you've got legislators. Now, in spite of all this news, because it's election year, they are trying to introduce legislation to make it easier to pad the pensions. Earlier retirement. What else was here? We had earlier retirement and full benefits before you're even 62. Before you're even 60.
That's right.
Now, will you answer me one question? What the hell's going on up there?
I'll tell you. It is, on this level, it is a morass up there. The question of of unfunded mandates, which are the state telling, it starts with the federal government telling the state, and then the state telling the counties, you're going to do this. Okay? I'm not going to give you any money for it.
Unfunded mandates.
Okay,
right?
I'm not
Is
going to
that-
give you
yeah,
any
yeah,
money
right,
for it,
right.
but if you don't do it, we're going to hand your head to you. Okay? So that is essentially what an unfunded mandate is. It is killing the counties, and one of the biggest expenses that the counties have to bear are the pensions.
Now, you said
Right.
this was from a report that's out there.
Now, I have been championing for the last year. There is a report that was done by the New York State Association of Counties.
Right.
That is an association of the 62 county executives in the state of New York. They are the recipients of this unfunded mandate, and the other ones, which include Medicaid. They wrote in
You might well, but when you say recipients, we're really saying victims.
They're the victims.
Right,
And
that's-
this
yeah,
spans
that's
party
right,
I'm
that's
sorry.
lines.
right.
Now,
They
these
are the
county
victims.
executives span party lines. This is not a partisan.
Correct. This report was made by the offices of the 62 county executives, both Democrat and Republican. It is a completely bipartisan report that was issued last February, a year ago, and what it offered was the mechanism to relieve the counties of the burdens of these unfunded mandates, and to do so in a rational, evolutionary manner that would not dislocate everybody in the state from
Right.
from going through this. And at this point in Albany, it is being treated like the unwanted stepchild. It is the Simpson Bowles version of what we are dealing
even
with.
the governor's proposals only deal with new hires because the present
right.
hires are protected by the Constitution.
Constitution.
And nobody's proposing a constitutional amendment to change
Yeah, but
that.
that's not unusual. It's called grandfathering in. What's
Right,
already
but,
there.
but if it's protected by the constitutional amendment, could change that. But nobody's bringing that up, so it doesn't matter. That's a pipe dream. So what's there now exists. We're only talking about people that aren't even in the workforce yet.
That's right.
Yet you
That's
are
right.
getting such pressure from the union. What
It's
is it like? What is this pressure
unbelievable.
like?
Yeah.
We let, through my office, I let everyone who's been, calling about this know that if you're employed right now in the union, this is not going to affect you in the least.
Right.
But what we must do is be realistic about the finances of the state of New York, what we can and cannot afford right now. We're about to be talking about a $3 billion budget deficit for this year's budget.
But doesn't that, when you say that, Steve, it isolates it that it's not the rank and file, it's the union leadership, which
Absolutely.
I always say is where the real problem is. It's not
Absolutely.
necessarily the rank and file union members,
Absolutely.
it's the union leadership that are basically protecting
Exactly.
I
their
understand,
own
but
columns,
it is
yeah.
the rank and file of the assembly that's being bought.
Well, that has been the case, unfortunately, for decades. And in order to get something through the assembly like this would be virtually impossible, because Sheldon Silver,
But was they
at
get
the
what,
top
they-
of that apex, would absolutely, I'm sure it would never get to the
Because
floor.
of the donations from the union.
Correct.
Right? Yeah.
Well, only
Because-
even though you're not in the other house, but aren't Sheldon Silver and Dean Skelos of like mind? Dean Skelos
Well,
being the
opposite
head of the
parties.
Senate, and he's the Republican and the Senate's controlled. But aren't they of like mind on pension reform? Forget it.
I would say that's pretty close to the truth right
Because
now.
they're both, because Skelos, who's got a closer,
He's got to keep his majority.
and that's a lot tighter than Silver's majority.
That's right.
Which is, I mean, for you to get anything done in the assembly, you would actually have to sacrifice your principles to get something with your name on it through the assembly. Am I correct?
Well,
because
yes,
you're in such
but-
a minority.
Yeah, I'm not. That's not one of my goals. Is to have
Right.
some
No, but
compromise bill
when
with my
people
name on
say,
it.
"Oh, what has Steve Katz done for the 99th district?" You're a Republican, and a minority member of the assembly is actually neutered. There's nothing you can really do unless you sell out your principles.
Right. It's virtually impossible for a minority member to get to sponsor a bill. Probably the only exception I can tell you is if it's a veteran-related bill.
Right.
Then you can get
But
your
you know,
name on it.
but again, you were swept into office because you weren't a team player. And this came up in a recent Republican primary debate, if you saw it, where Rick Santorum, who obviously has a lot of currency right now, but he made what was roundly criticized as a sort of a ridiculous comment, saying he voted against his principles when he was in the Senate to be a team player. But again, as I said at the outset of the show regarding, Mike Kaplowitz voting against his team, that says nothing about what you're doing in behalf of your constituents. It's not about being on the team, in this very exclusive club that you're in. It's about doing something for your constituents.
Isn't your team
right.
supposed to be the constituent that voted for you, or actually the constituent of your district? But the people, you were swept in by the Tea Party. You were one of the first Tea Party victories because you had a primary to what you had to do.
Correct.
So you were one of the first Tea Party, and I assume you still have their love and affection.
I believe I do.
Yeah, and so
and the point being too, when the team is a corrupting influence, then you go against the team, right?
Right.
You don't go with the team.
I have spent my time, number one, being a minority assemblyman. The most important responsibility I have is to my district and to my constituents.
Right.
Which is why they
That
still
is
call you
number
Dr.
one
No.
and 1A.
Which is why like we covered in the first show we did with you, that's on YouTube. For you folks, the Best of Booster blog goes Bazzo, where you explain the moniker Dr. No, which you still have, I assume.
No one calls me anything but Steve Katz up there. But
And by the way, never say Monica to a politician, okay? Anyhow.
But I do the very best I can
But
to
you did
let
admit
people
that they
know
did call
that.
you Dr.
Yes,
No
they
up
did.
there.
Oh yeah. It's a funny name.
That's good for
It's a
your
funny name.
district. I think it's a term of endearment to your district.
I do everything I can to make sure that we don't have government run amok up there.
Now
which is,
you're getting-
which is what their tendency is.
Now
Yeah.
you're getting
So-
beat up over a proposal of yours to voter ID.
Yes.
That have a identification when you vote.
That's correct.
And the people beating you up say it stigmatizes the minorities.
That's right.
And I'm saying to myself, wait a second, I go shopping every day and I see minorities buy beer and they show ID. No matter how old you are, you have to show ID.
That's right.
You buy cigarettes, you have to show ID. You take an airplane.
That's right.
Yeah.
You have to show. So
I'll take it a step further after that in something
What
we passed.
yes, you told me that they had passed something about recycling, but anyway.
Yes.
What is the stigmatization? If they're not being stigmatized to buy beer,
That's right.
what's the stigmatization, whatever the word is?
Stigma.
Stigma for voting.
Well, it's interesting because the arguments that they've come up which quite frankly are embarrassing was the first one that they said was the law is that you should not have to pay in order to vote. Okay, but by the same token, if you are a legal resident of this country, you should be able to get a government-issued picture ID from the state of New York, not a driver's license, and to get that for 4 to 5 years, you know how much that costs? $9. Okay, it's $9.
affordable.
But that's not paying to vote.
That's right.
Because you need that
That's
ID
right.
for beer.
You would need that. Or not
Airplane
only
travel.
that. That's right, Andy. Not only that, but 2 weeks ago, before we recessed,
You told me
we
this on the phone. I thought this was great.
We passed a bill in the Assembly that if you are buying scrap metal, if you're a scrap metal dealer, and you are purchasing scrap metal from a seller, that seller must have, you guessed it, a government-issued photo ID. Okay, now if it's good enough for scrap metal, it should be good enough for one of the most sacred rights that we have in this country, and that's to have fair elections
to live up
that
to
are
my
honest.
reputation of being in your face, I'm going to do this. I have always believed that motor voter and this fight against a national ID, not a national ID, but this a photo ID for voting is to perpetuate voter fraud. There's no other reason for voter to be this early mailing voting is to make it easier to commit fraud and to say, well, we're not going to let you prove who you are. The only argument is we want voter fraud, and this is we're going to stop any attempt to curb it because we can't win an honest election.
Andy, I'll tell you, I couldn't agree more. I haven't had one argument yet that makes any sense and that says anything but, yes, I'm willing to have voter fraud, I need it for the elections, and we're going to continue this disgraceful practice. Okay, I feel the same way about a flat tax. Any page more than what your flat tax should be is an admission that you want special interests to control the tax system of our country and our state.
And let's move on. We have other topics to cover.
Yeah,
right? We want to talk about redistricting as well.
Well, let's see. Between
Remember,
redistricting,
it's only 30 minutes. We haven't gone to
between
60 minutes yet.
redistricting and the minimum wage, I think right now let's go into redistricting.
Yeah, I know that's a hot
because
topic.
They've added Putnam Valley to your district, and what did they take out? If the present lines as they're proposed stand,
Right.
You got Putnam Valley, which
That's right.
that helps you become even more Republican. But what did they take away from you?
Well, I lost Pauling and I lost North Salem, both of which meant a lot to me because I've made many friends
what
there,
district
and
are they
I've worked
in now?
very I've worked on their behalf very
What
hard.
district have they become part of?
One of them is moved up to the Dutchess County, I believe.
Oh,
It's
okay.
it would be Joel Miller's district,
Miller,
right?
yeah.
And the other one was moved to become part of Bob Castelli's district, which was the 89th.
Right.
Okay.
He's an Assemblyman Castelli.
Yes, he is.
He's one that sold his soul to the Democrats to get his name on legislation. He's a rhino. I get his press releases. I print his press releases. It's like reading a Democrat press release. How can he hang his head and say he's a Republican? I'll never understand that one.
Well, a couple of answers.
It was rhetorical, more or less.
The one
because-
thing I'll say is, number one, he is in a district that is far more democratic. He won his election by 112 votes. That doesn't necessarily mean that you should not be voting your conscience.
I was just going to say.
Okay?
That's what we said about
Which
my
is
council.
exactly
Right.
what we're
That's what we
talking
voted
about.
as
It
party,
doesn't
right.
matter.
So-
You should be voting your conscience as I do.
Right.
But Bob Castelli was the 10th man in to relieve Khe Sanh in Vietnam. He is
Really?
a hero.
Wow,
And I
I didn't
have
know that.
nothing but respect for Bob Castelli on that level.
I only go
We have
by the
2 minutes, by the
right,
way.
and I go by the press releases. But I will tell you this with redistricting. They made your district strong. What is so popular about your district that everybody that's occupied it so far has to go through a primary? You have a primary opponent right now for the 99th district, a Republican out of Putnam. His name escapes me at the moment, and it has escaped me. When your predecessor had it, he always had a primary. What is so popular about being in the minority that everybody wants to be in that district?
Here's what I know. Primaries are a good thing.
Yeah, absolutely.
Primaries give the voters a chance to decide who they want to represent them.
Right.
And so I have no problem with primaries whatsoever.
Well, I wasn't saying it's a problem, but to be in the minority, to be able to accomplish really nothing without selling your print, yet people primary for this thing.
Oh, it's just wonderful. You get to go up to Albany for half the year. You get to be away from your family.
I heard
you get
Albany's a boring verb-plank.
Okay, yeah,
They
we
call
got,
it Smallbany.
All right, anyhow, on wrapping up, this is all I have to say about redistricting. That recent cartoon in the Pennysaver showed I don't think you would have seen this yet.
What?
That the 3 people who were doing the redistricting, they have name tags: Mo, Larry, and Curly. Anyhow,
That wasn't in already?
no. By the time people see the show, we'll have.
I'll give you my
Anyhow,
quick answer on redistricting. No one knows at all what's going to happen.
Right, yeah.
And
Anyhow.
yes, and these were my opinions. You may beg to differ.
And when Bruce the Blog listens, people, including our friend Dr. Steve Katz,
Absolutely.
Assemblyman Talk. Thanks for watching, everyone.
Good evening. See you next week. And you can't differ that it's good to have Steve on the show.
Thanks,
Great to
Steve.
see
Thanks,
you.
as always.
Great to see you, my friends.
This was good. I know we didn't get to the minimum wage, but that's...
You know what?
You can't get everything. No.
So long as it's interesting.
Yeah,
right?
that's all.